You can go ahead and begin the recording for the CalABLE workshop with disability rights. And Daniel, go ahead and take it from here.
Actually, that will be me.
Oh, Lonnie is going to
you.
start.
No
Excellent.
problem.
Lonnie.
Thank you, Diana and Myra, for having us today. For those who don't know about disability rights, I'll just share a little bit and then we'll go right into the training. DRC was formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We provide legal services for people with disability. We work on issues such as special education, public benefit, regional center services, housing, employment, and so forth. Our offices are located in Sacramento, Los Angeles, and the Bay Area, and San Diego. And we have smaller offices in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. Our staff attorney, Daniel, and senior advocate, Mary Rios, will be presenting this afternoon for you. And I will now load up the PowerPoint once.
Thank you, Lonnie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Rios. I'm one of the senior advocates at Disability Rights California. And today we are going to talk about the basics of the ABLE program and the CalABLE program, which is here in the state of California. Next slide, Lonnie. So quick disclaimer, the following presentation is meant for education only and does not constitute legal advice nor counsel. Your situation may be unique and require careful attention. Keep in mind that the information in these slides could become out of date as the laws and local practices relating to these matters are constantly developing. So, next slide, thank you. So today we will talk about, again, ABLE basics in other states. We're going to cover later on CalABLE basics for the state of California, and then we're going to share some resources with you. Next slide. So first I want to talk about the SSI and Medi-Cal resource limits. So for those of you who receive SSI, that is based on income and resources. So, and it's based on needs. It's a needs program as well. So SSI is basically available for individuals, seniors who are older than 65, and also available to people who have disabilities under the age of 65. It is, again, based on resources and income. And for example, you can own a home, you can, own one vehicle, and there's some other items that are also exempt. But just keep in mind that SSI does have an individual limit of $2,000, and for a couple, it's $3,000. Medi-Cal, there were some changes in Medi-Cal last year in July. Medi-Cal basically had the same limits. However, now you can have up to $130,000 for an individual and an additional $65,000 for each additional family member. So when thinking about the ABLE program, that's something you want to think about because it may not affect the Medi-Cal, but if you're receiving SSI, you still want to watch out with the limit. However, with Medi-Cal, they're also thinking about removing the asset limit. And I believe they're thinking about removing the asset limit, I believe in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. And we are going to share some links and we'll add those to the chat in a bit. Next slide. So ABLE basics at the federal level, there was legislation in 2014, and there were advocates that advocated for the ABLE program. ABLE, the acronym is Achieving a Better Life Experience. And this was because people were concerned with the limitations in terms of the needs based on needs programs such as SSI, Medi-Cal, and other federal programs. So they advocated at the federal level, And there was legislation in 2014 for states to create a tax advantage savings and investment program for people with disabilities. And this money in the ABLE accounts does not affect eligibility for benefits like SSI or Medi-Cal. So there are limits that one has to consider, and we'll go over those limits. So money in the ABLE accounts is used to pay, you can use it to pay for housing, education, food, transportation, and many more items that fall under the qualified expenses, and we'll touch on those in a bit. Next slide. So state ABLE programs, currently there are 46 states and the District of Columbia who participate in the ABLE program. And each of the states have its own requirements. There are several similarities among some states, but you can only have one ABLE program. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So doing the research and looking to see what other states offer, you can compare to the CalABLE program here in California to see which one is convenient and which one is better for you. There are some limitations in some states. You would have to check to see if that state allows out-of-state residents to open one, the ABLE account within their state. So there's some research that has to be done, but I think in order for you to see which one better fits the individual that is applying for or opening an account under the ABLE program, there is a website here, the ABLE, it's a National Resource Center, and there's a tool that you can use to compare states to see what their requirements are, to see which program better fits your needs. You can also search the programs and the features, again, under the ABLE National Resource Center. And we'll go ahead and include these slides. I'm sorry, the links in the chat. Next slide. So when comparing state plans amongst the different states, some things that you definitely want to consider is what are the requirements within those states? What documents are needed to open an account? What plans, what investments do they offer? What is the cost for maintaining an account, and what are the fees that each state charges? Other requirements that are unique to that state. So these are things that you want to take into consideration when doing the research and comparing the different states in terms of the ABLE program. Next slide. So in order to be eligible to open an ABLE account, the individual with a disability had to become disabled prior to the age of 26. And or receive SSI or SSDI, or not receiving those services. However, self-certify. You would have been diagnosed by a qualified physician with a physical or mental disability resulting in marked and severe functional limitations that is expected to last at least 1 year. So in essence, you can open an account if you have a disability. However, keep in mind that they may ask for documentation from your medical providers, or if you're not receiving SSI or SSDI. So just keep in mind that you do have to have a document filled out. We do have a link here, and we're going to share this information as well. But there is a sample certification for a letter that your doctor can fill out to basically confirm that you do meet the qualifications. And we'll include these links in the chat as well. Next slide, Lonnie. Can you go back one slide? I just want to touch a little bit more on the disabled before age 26. So one thing to keep in mind as well is, say, for example, there is a person who is 50 years old. However, they had their disability at they became disabled at a very young age. That person would qualify for an ABLE program because they can be became disabled prior to the age of 26. But let's say that there's a person that's 30 years old and became disabled at the age of 27. That person would not qualify because they didn't acquire their disability prior to the age of 26. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Next slide, Money. So yearly contributions for an ABLE account, there is a limit, $17,000 that one can put into the ABLE account. In Alaska, it's $16,990, and in Hawaii, it's a little less, $15,630. However, if the individual is working, if they have an ABLE account and they don't participate in an employer-sponsored retirement account, they can save an additional $13,590, which is great. Which the total, if you look at the total of $17,000 per year that one can put into the ABLE account, plus if the person is working and not participating in a sponsored retirement account, they can add an additional $13,590, which equals $30,590 per year. So this is a great program for people that are working as well, where you can add an additional $13,590. So it's a really good program. Next slide. Anybody can contribute to the individual's ABLE account, which includes family, friends, and the account holder themselves. States have set limits for total allowable ABLE savings. Limits range. So in essence, what you can, the individual that has an ABLE account can have between 235,000 to 529,000. In the state of California, it's 529,000 plus earnings. However, in the state of California, or when you open an ABLE account, keep in mind that if you receive SSI, that limit is $100,000. So if somebody is receiving SSI benefits, they can only have a maximum of $100,000 in the ABLE account. But if you're not receiving SSI or any other federal programs, that the limit is between 235 and 529,000, depending on the state. So that's something to look into as well, depending on where you want to open your ABLE account. Again, the maximum if you're receiving SSI benefits is $100,000, and it won't affect your SSI. When an ABLE account exceeds the $100,000 limit, it will be treated as a resource. So what happens is that if you exceed that amount, SSI may suspend your benefit, but they will not terminate it until you would have to bring it below the $100,000, and then they start your benefits up again. So you want to make sure that any expenses that you pay with your ABLE account, you also want to save receipts. And we're going to go over in a couple of minutes what is considered or what qualifies under the what you can use your the account for. And again, once the ABLE account balance is over $100,000, it falls back under the if you're under the resource limit again, they'll start your benefits up again. Even after 12 months of being off of SSI. So they can suspend it until you bring that limit below $100,000. Next slide. Any money deposited into the ABLE account by a third party is not counted as income. So in essence, if you were to give the individual who is receiving SSI money versus putting the money into an ABLE account, if you were to give it to the person, that would count as income. So if you deposit it into the ABLE account, it won't count as an income. So again, any person can deposit money into the individual account holder's account in the ABLE account, and that will not be counted as income for the individual who is the account owner. Next slide, thank you. Any amount of the ABLE savings will also not affect any of the following programs. If you receive housing assistance through HUD, if you're on a SNAP or CalFresh in California, if you're receiving CalFresh, any federal student aids, the FAFSA or Medicare or any type of Medicaid benefit, SSDI benefits. So having an ABLE account will not affect any of the federal programs that you're on, which is, again, it's great that it doesn't affect these benefits that one is receiving. And in essence, once when you open up a CalABLE account, you can use, or an ABLE account, you can use the monies for qualified disability expenses, which is great. Next slide. So the account balance, principal, and income can be invested through a variety of options offered by the state ABLE program. And I think, again, that's why it's important to do research to see what the different states offer, what investment programs they have, and opening an ABLE account are basically tax-free. The earnings grow tax-free. And that's why it's really important to do the research, look at the ABLE National Resource Network to see which program is beneficial for the individual with a disability who is going to be the account holder. Next slide. The beneficiary is always the account holder. And you can only have one ABLE account per beneficiary, regardless of what state you open the account in. And if you have a college savings plan, you can roll that over into your ABLE account without being penalized. Just keep in mind that you can only roll over a maximum of $17,000 per year. So let's say that you have I don't know, $20,000 of college savings, you can only roll over 17,000. That's something to keep in mind as well. The same occurs for pool trust or special needs. So if you want to roll that money into the ABLE account, there is that limit where you can only put $17,000, which is the maximum amount per year. Here we talk about the qualified disability expenses, which is really broad. What is a qualified disability expense? Any expense related to the designated beneficiary as a result of living a life with disabilities that either helps maintain or improve their health. It helps them become more independent or improves their quality of life. So they can either use this either to improve their health. Let's say they want to go to the gym. Let's say they want to take a trip. They want to go on a vacation. Just keep in mind that the funds can only be used for the individual who is the account holder. Here we have a list. Next slide, Lonnie, sorry. Next is a list of qualified disability expenses. You can use the money in the ABLE account for housing, to purchase food, transportation, employment, training and support, adaptive equipment, health, prevention and wellness. Again, take a vacation, any financial management or oversight. other expenses approved by the Treasury regulation. So one thing to keep in mind, it's very broad in terms of the qualified disability expenses. What we recommend basically is that when you use the funds from the ABLE account, that you save receipts. Um, you know, you don't have, so what, and we say this because the ABLE account, that what they don't monitor, but keep in mind that they may audit you at some point. So you definitely want to keep the receipts. If you're not sure if an item qualifies as a qualified disability expense, you can send the ABLE program with, if it's in the state of California, it would be CalABLE, but you can contact the ABLE program to see if the expense that you're trying to make falls under the qualified disability expense. And, what I would recommend is that you send an email. That way you have it in writing. You want to make sure that it does qualify under the qualified disability expense. So that's really important as well. Next slide, Lonnie. Some things that don't qualify as the qualified disability expense are subject to regular income taxes plus a 10% tax penalty on account earnings, and benefits may be at risk. So examples of that are gambling, alcohol, expenses that are questionable by the IRS. You can't buy an illegal item. You can't buy a gift for someone other than the beneficiary. So again, any doubt on the expensed item, you definitely want to send an email and get confirmation. You want to definitely find out if it's a qualified disability expense um, to make sure that you're utilizing the funds appropriately, because again, they're subject to regular income taxes if they don't meet the qualified disability expense. Next slide. So regarding housing expenses, SSI benefits can be affected if you use ABLE funds for any housing expenses and don't spend the money in the same month. So let's say you took money out in April. So let's say it was March. So you took money out in March to pay your rent. You want to use the monies that same month that you pull the money out, because if you don't, that can be counted as a resource. So you want to make sure that whenever you pull out that money to pay for items, you want to use them within that same month. Make sure to spend that housing money within the same calendar month that you withdrew the money, because again, if it carries over to the following month, it could be counted as a resource. And that's really important. There's also what's called in-kind support and maintenance. Distributions from the ABLE account for food and or shelter does not reduce the SSI monthly payment. So when one is receiving SSI benefits and they live in somebody else's home, sometimes they will consider if the individual does not pay rent or buy food, it's called in-kind support and maintenance. And the Social Security Administration can reduce the amount of benefits they get. But if they utilize um, the the ABLE account, they cannot reduce the amount, especially if you're going to use that money to pay for rent and food. We've included a website here, which Justice and Aging has a great publication that talks about in-kind support and maintenance and the SSI program. So I would, if you have any questions in terms of in-kind support and maintenance, I would definitely look at that publication. Next slide. So here we included a link for the ABLE Resource Center decision guides. Again, it's the ABLE National Resource Center.org. You want to look at the publications, and they have really good information in this website, and I would recommend that you review the publications that they have on this website, because if you have questions, some of the publications can answer those questions. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you so much, Mary. Good afternoon. I'm like, is it morning still? No, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daniel Hernandez, and I'm going to go over the California Specific ABLE program known as CalABLE. So as Mary mentioned, various states have their own specific ABLE programs, which vary in characteristics and even requirements, though there are similarities, the ones that Mary mentioned in the previous slides. And a good analogy to put this into perspective is to look at the ABLE program as a tree, right? Where the trunk is the ABLE program, and from the trunk, there are several limbs, right? And each limb is the individual ABLE program for each state. For instance, the ABLE program for Nevada is known as ABLE Nevada. The one for Delaware is known as Dependable. The one for Massachusetts has an entirely different name. I think it's the Attainable Savings Account Plan or something to that effect. But for California, it's called CalABLE, which we'll be focusing on in the next few slides. So each state has its own ABLE program, but each is born from the same federal law that Mary mentioned, the ABLE Act from 2014. Okay, so the few things that we'll cover in terms of CalABLE include, well, some characteristics of CalABLE. The more important ones include the following, right? CalABLE accounts have low fees. It's a free and easy online enrollment process. People in California who are participating in CalABLE can use e-gifting, and then they can also use CalABLE Visa prepaid cards or obtain them if desired. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about who can open a CalABLE account, right? So who has the authority to open an account in California? So to be eligible to open a CalABLE account, someone has to be the following. They have to be a US citizen or an individual residing in the United States. They have to be of 18 years of age or older with the legal capacity to contract. And in California, there's a rebuttable presumption that someone has legal capacity to contract, meaning that it's presumed that one is 18 or older, unless it's proven otherwise, right? They have the legal capacity to contract. Another requirement is that the person have a social security number or a taxpayer identification number. In California, sometimes known as an ITIN. And then the person also has to have a US permanent address. That's not a PO box. So PO box would not be acceptable, right? In order to open a CalABLE account, you would have to have a US permanent address on file. Next slide. So let's say we have an individual who's unable to open the account for him or herself, right? Enable account for him or herself. For example, if someone is a minor or is in a conservatorship, right, where they don't retain that right, the following individuals may be able to open the ABLE account for that person. So a person with a legally enforceable power of attorney, or in this order, the individual's conservator or legal guardian, their spouse, their parent, a sibling, a grandparent, and finally, a representative payee appointed by Social Security or SSA, in that order specifically. So either a person with a legal enforceable power of attorney, or in that order, the group that I just mentioned. Next slide. So that was to open an account, right? Now, let's talk about who can manage the account. Once it's opened, who has the ability to manage a CalABLE account? Whether it could be the person themselves, right? The ABLE eligible individual, they can manage the account, or an authorized legal representative. And in this case, you can think about somebody who's a minor, right? Who can't manage the account themselves, right? They would need an authorized legal representative. And of course, if there is an authorized legal representative, only the authorized legal representative may manage the CalABLE account. Now, let's talk about who can be an authorized legal representative. So if people can establish the following criteria, right, the following requirements, they can become an authorized legal representative. The first requirement is that the person has to be a US citizen or an individual residing in the US. Next, the person is at least 18 years of age. The person also has to have a social security number or other taxpayer identification number. For example, we mentioned an ITIN. The person also has to have a US permanent address that's not a PO box. And finally, the person has to be one of the following. So they have to be a person that was selected by the ABLE eligible person. In other words, the account holder, right? The person who benefits from the CalABLE account. Also a person with a power of attorney, a legally enforceable power of attorney, and again, the same group that we mentioned before in this order, right? A conservator or legal guardian, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a grandparent, or a representative payee appointed by Social Security. So that's who is able to manage an account. Either the person themselves, right, the account holder, or an authorized legal representative if the account holder is unable to. Next slide. So let's say we've already established, okay, we know who can open an account, right? We know who can manage an account. So how does one go about signing up for a CalABLE account? So one would need a taxpayer ID number, right, of the account holder or the social security number, and of the authorized legal representative as well, if an authorized legal representative is used or assigned. There's a $25 initial deposit fee in order to sign up and establish the account. And then in most cases, right, one would provide a routing and the account number of a bank account if they wish to link a bank account to transfer money to and from the CalABLE account. That's also very important. Next slide. So now let's talk about the application process, right? And here we have a link to the CalABLE website where one can start the process of enrolling, and it can be done online. And the link we'll put in the chat, but if not, we'll provide the presentation and the links to you after the fact. And here are the general steps for the application process, right? You would have to create a user ID and a password. Next, you would select a delivery options of how you would like to receive statements or other information, whether electronically, right, or if you want paper copies. You also would choose an investment option or choose investment options, which we'll briefly go over later in this presentation. Another step, right, is to link a bank account. And finally, request a prepaid debit card if you so desire. And we'll talk a bit more about these things later on in the presentation. But that's generally how the application process looks like. Next slide. So let's say you've opened a CalABLE account, right? The question becomes how do you add money, right, to the CalABLE account? How do you add the funds? How do you make the contributions? It's a pretty straightforward, intuitive process. You would first log into the CalABLE.ca.gov account, and contributions can be made at any time, right, by check or ACH transfer from an account connected to the CalABLE account. And ACH is short for Automated Clearinghouse. And this is a method of electronic bank-to-bank payments. So, right, connecting one bank to another bank, and then you would essentially transfer money in that way. And then one should generally allow up to 10 business days, right, for contributions by check or ACH to be transferred into an account for it to be reflected in the account once the transfer is complete. And here we have a link to frequently asked CalABLE questions with the various responses. And you can refer to it in more information. And Mary has put it in the chat for all of you to refer to. You can go to the next slide, please. So we've discussed how do you place money into the CalABLE account. So how do we make distributions, or in other words, how do we withdraw money to make those qualified disability expenses that Mary touched upon earlier? So same general process, right? You would log into the CalABLE.ca.gov account, and then withdrawals or distributions can be requested by check. But keep in mind that if you do request distributions by check, there is a $5 fee per check. And of course, those checks would be mailed to the desired recipient, or you can do an ACH transfer that can be moved to a connected bank account, which from my understanding has no fee. And then funds can also be loaded directly into a CalABLE account onto an optional CalABLE Visa prepaid debit card, which is strongly recommended, right? Because then you would be able to make those withdrawal or use the card to make these qualified disability expenses. And of course, a Visa debit card can be used anywhere where they're accepted. And most merchants will accept a Visa prepaid debit card. Also, like Mary mentioned, right, something very important is that CalABLE or the state, right, doesn't track or verify whether a distribution is a qualified disability expense or not. So it's important, like Mary said, to keep records of this. And this is particularly the case if the account is ever audited by Social Security or the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, because it may happen. So it's just a way to protect oneself, right? By keeping these records, you'll have proof that the expense was a qualified disability expense, and it's important to track those expenses. And another thing, right, one should allow up to 10 business days, right, for distributions made by check or ACH transfer to reflect. Next slide. Okay, e-gifting. E-gifting is a pretty powerful tool within the CalABLE program. So CalABLE now offers a gifting tool, which, well, from the very beginning it did, that allows a person to ask friends and family for gifts on holidays, special occasions, or to help them reach a specific financial goal. And this is great, right? Because like Mary stated, especially for some benefit programs like SSI or Social Security benefit programs, this would not count as income, right? If you receive money from others into your CalABLE account, even if it's a gift, it would not count as income. So that's important. That's a great benefit of e-gifting under CalABLE. And in order to do this, right, in order to set up an e-gift event, you would log into the CalABLE account. There's a tab within the account, e-gift is what the tab is called. And it's on the CalABLE menu. And then you would set up an event and create a personalized message. For example, friends and family, you know, I'm have a specific financial goal that I want to meet. Can you contribute to this goal? So after that, right, you're given a unique link, e-gift link, which can be shared with your family members or your friends. And then CalABLE will then send out the email on your behalf with the unique link and with the personalized message, and it would instruct people on how to make the online contribution electronically. And the email can be sent to as many friends and family members or people as a person desires. So e-gift, great thing to have under CalABLE. Next slide. So like Mary stated earlier, right, a lot of all ABLE programs are savings or investment based programs or accounts. So CalABLE specifically offers a total of 4 savings and investment options. This means that when you open a CalABLE account, you will be asked to opt into one or more. For some options, there's a larger investment risk that's taken when one chooses a particular option or plan. And there's 4 that CalABLE has, right? The FDIC insured portfolio, that's the first one. And this is the most stable and of least risk out of all the 4, since it's 100% interest-bearing account, meaning that the growth is guaranteed, even though the rate of return may not be as large as the other options, may be minimal, but it's a guaranteed interest-bearing account. And the other options listed here range from more risk to the most risk. And we have a conservative portfolio, right, where there's a risk, not nearly as high as the other ones at the moderate or aggressive growth portfolio, but so they range, right? Conservative portfolio has more of a risk than an FDIC insured portfolio. Moderate portfolio has a greater risk than the conservative portfolio, and then the aggressive growth portfolio has the greatest risk. And this is because 80% of the funds, right, are invested in stocks. And this is the riskiest, right, when compared to the other options, because the stock market can be very volatile. So although the growth may be large at any given point, one can also lose a lot at any given point. And if you want more information about these investment options, you can follow the link that we're providing in this presentation or in the chat, and it goes into greater detail about each of those investment or savings options under CalABLE. Next slide. Okay, so now we'll speak a bit about the fees and the expenses that one incurs, right, by having a CalABLE account. So there's an annual fee of $37, and it's deducted in monthly installments from each CalABLE account. There are also low fees on the underlying investment options, meaning, right, if you opt for one particular investment or savings option, then there's going to be a fee connected to that option. Plus, there's a state administrative fee, and then additional fees may apply if you choose not to use certain online features, such as receiving paper statements. And that's because, right, to print physical paper statements, there's a cost incurred because, printing costs or what have you. And to find out more about these fees, you can visit the link that we're providing here in the chat, or that's on this slide. And this will provide a breakdown of all the fees and expenses. And we'll also provide examples under each expense made for a particular investment or savings option, which is very helpful. Next slide. Okay, Medi-Cal and CalABLE. So Mary mentioned earlier, right, Medi-Cal, which is the Medicaid program in California. It provides healthcare services, including medical, dental, mental health, substance use treatment, long-term care services, and supports for low-income adults, children, seniors, pregnant women, and persons with disabilities. It's a very expansive program that's meant to help the public. And Medi-Cal is a specific program for California. So something that we want to note that at the time of ABLE eligible person's death, or in the event that a person who has a CalABLE account, the account holder, dies, any outstanding qualified disability expenses, including funeral and legal expenses, may be used from the ABLE funds, right? They can be paid using the CalABLE funds. And the accounts are then transferred into the deceased's individual estate. And an estate is essentially the property or money that a person has or owns when they pass away, right? That's all the estate is. But after all those QDEs or qualified disability expenses are made, right, including funeral and legal expenses, all that's left over is then put into the person's estate. Next slide. So saying that, we're going to talk about Medi-Cal estate recovery. And this is under California law or Senate Bill 833. So let's say that an individual passes away and has a CalABLE account. There are some instances where Medi-Cal will attempt to recover some or all of the money that remains in the CalABLE account. But it will only do this under a very specific situation. So Medi-Cal will only attempt recovery if all of the following, we have a list here, is established, right? So all, not just one, but every single one of these elements have to be satisfied in order for Medi-Cal to attempt recovery. First, the person that passed away was age 55 or older. Second, the person was a user of a nursing facility service or home and community-based services, including related hospital and prescription drug services. Next, a person's estate is required to go into formal probate, which means that an estate is worth $184,500 or more. So in California specifically, and this will vary by state, but just for California, if a person's assets, meaning all the property and money that's left over, right, when somebody passes away, if that amount exceeds $184,000 and $184,500 at death, then the court will have to determine how those assets will be distributed, right? How is this property and how is this money going to be distributed? Generally, if assets are lower than that, though, there's no need to go through the probate court process, right? So, but that's one requirement that the estate has to be worth more than $184,500 or more. Next, it also has to be established that the person is not survived by a spouse or a registered domestic partner, children under 21 years of age, or a disabled child of any age. So that's important to consider, right? Some people have this misbelief, right, that Medi-Cal will attempt recovery, right, under any circumstance if a person has money left over in their CalABLE account, but that's not the case. All of these requirements have to be met before Medi-Cal will attempt recovery, which is important, right? Because if one of these is not satisfied, then there will be no attempt at recovery. But let's say even if Medi-Cal is going to attempt recovery because all of these elements have been satisfied, well, there's something else that can be done, what's known as a hardship waiver. So if a recipient of an estate, there's a recipient of an estate, meaning something's going through the probate process, and a person has been identified as someone that is entitled to receive property or money from somebody that has passed away, right? In order to prevent Medi-Cal from, in order to not stop necessarily, right, because every situation is going to be different, but in order to attempt to stop Medi-Cal from recovering any of those CalABLE funds, one can apply for a hardship waiver, which means, the person will have to demonstrate that the claim would cause them substantial hardship, right, if that money is taken from them or the property is taken from them. And there's specific criteria that has to be met for this. But of course, if you're interested in this, you can call our intake line, right, and we can provide a copy of that substantial hardship waiver application. And the last thing we'll say about Medi-Cal estate recovery is that the recovery is limited to the amount of payments made for the services listed above, right, including managed care premiums or the value of the estate, whichever is less. So if the value of the estate is, let's say, $200,000, and let's say the $100,000 is what pertains to the CalABLE account, right? But let's say the Medi-Cal, all the services that were paid under Medi-Cal are the equivalent of $45,000. So Medi-Cal will only try to recover the $45,000, right? So even if there's less, right, they can only recover what is less, whatever's in the CalABLE account or the amount that was used for services under Medi-Cal. Next slide. Okay, another thing we'll add is that up to $100,000, if a CalABLE account, right, is exempt from money judgments from general creditors. So that's if you have general creditors, right, and you have $100,000 in a CalABLE account, general creditors cannot access that. They're forbidden from accessing that. However, we do want to point out that this account protection only applies to California residents with a CalABLE account. So let's say you're Washington State resident, right? But because California allows out-of-state residents to have a CalABLE account, it doesn't necessarily mean that a Washington State resident is gonna be able to access this protection, right, from general creditors. So just something to keep in mind as well. And to get more information about CalABLE's interaction with Medi-Cal eligibility, which we previously discussed, you can refer to the link that we have here on the slide, or Mary will put it in the chat for you. And also something to keep in mind is that this fact sheet reflects the 2022 maximum yearly ABLE contribution, which was 16,000, right? But for 2023, this amount has changed to 17,000. So just something to keep in mind as well. Next slide. Okay, so many of you who are somewhat familiar with the ABLE program, right, or even trusts generally, will often see these grouped together, right? ABLE accounts and special needs trusts. So we're going to briefly discuss some differences between the two, between CalABLE accounts and special needs trusts. So for those who are not familiar with special needs trusts, a special needs trust is a legal arrangement that's created to hold and manage a person's money, their property, or their assets. And specifically for special needs trust, right, it's for the benefit of someone who is disabled. And then another great thing about this trust is that it helps, like CalABLE, it helps preserve a person's eligibility for needs-based government benefits, like SSI, Medi-Cal, and all other types of federal programs or need-based programs. And there are different types of special needs trusts, but one commonly used by parents of people with disabilities is what's called a third-party special needs trust. And we're not going to go into great detail about trusts because we're not trust and estates attorneys and don't help establish trusts, but of course we do want to provide you the general information. So here we have a list of the differences between a CalABLE account and a special needs trust. And what I'll do is I'll just go through the list for each one individually. So for a CalABLE account, you can generally open one by yourself online in 20 minutes or less. The person with the disability is the owner of the account, and they or an authorized legal representative can manage and spend the money in the CalABLE account. There's a broad range of allowable uses, like Mary said, right? The qualified disability expenses is very broad, and it can include food, right, and housing, meaning even eating out at a restaurant. I think as of 2022, for example, for SSI purposes, that's considered an allowable expense, or housing, right, rental payments. And there's also associated costs with CalABLE accounts, such as the ones we listed, right, and the state administrative fees. So that's CalABLE accounts. So for special needs trusts, generally this requires an attorney or an estate planning professional to help create the trust. Also, a trustee, the person that helps manage the trust, has the sole discretion when it comes to spending, where it's different with a CalABLE, right? A CalABLE account, where that's not necessarily the case. There's also a broad range of allowable uses for special needs trusts, but it doesn't include food or housing, right? Can't typically make a rental payment with a special needs trust. And the costs for a special needs trust vary, can be anywhere from a few $100s to a few thousand to start. And it can be even more if there's ongoing costs. If there's an attorney, right, that has to be involved through the entire process, for example. We could go to the next slide. So we're going to continue, right, the comparison. So we'll continue with CalABLE accounts. So CalABLE accounts are free to open and fees start at just $37 a year. There are some investment choices that have additional fees, right? The 4 that we mentioned. Also, withdrawals are tax-free, but of course they have to be, the withdrawals have to be qualified disability expenses. For special needs trusts, the contributors are limited, right? Not everyone can just contribute to a special needs trust. And it doesn't always include the beneficiary, especially for third-party special needs trusts. And there are no deposit limits as well for special needs trusts. And that's a huge difference. Whereas in CalABLE, you can contribute up to $17,000 a year. More, right, if you're not participating in a employer retirement plan, like a 401k or a pension plan. And so there's no deposit limits. And also there's no overall balance limits as well, which can be helpful, but those are the main difference we have here. And the other thing is that earnings are taxed. Unlike with CalABLE accounts where earnings are not taxed, special needs trust earnings are usually taxed. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a new change in the law, right? So earlier, we mentioned that one has to be disabled before age 26, generally, right, in order to qualify to participate in an ABLE program. In California, CalABLE. Well, in 2022, the US Congress passed the ABLE Age Adjustment Act. So this now has increased the eligibility age of beneficiaries of ABLE accounts from the onset of disability before age 26, and it's now going to be an onset of disability before age 46. right? So usually, historically, right, where people who are between the age of 26 and 46, when they had the onset of the disability was during that time, they generally would not qualify to participate in ABLE programs, but that's going to change as of January 1st, 2026, where those people would be eligible. Of course, they have to meet the other criteria, but they would be eligible. Next slide. So here we have a few resources, including the ABLE National Resource Center website, which provides information about all of the state's ABLE programs, including California's, which is CalABLE. We'll also have the CalABLE website, which is specific to the California ABLE program. And there's a bunch of resources there. We also have a frequently asked questions fact sheet from CalABLE and the California Treasurer. We have a link for that. We can go to the next slide. We also have a link if you want to sign up to receive CalABLE information, especially if there's updates. You can sign up there. We also have the State Treasurer's resources for CalABLE. Also, you can sign up for quarterly newsletters from the California Treasurer in regards to the ABLE program, CalABLE. And then we also have a link to, if you're somebody that's receiving Social Security benefits, right, and you're looking to get CalABLE or on CalABLE, we have a resource here for Social Security's policy regarding ABLE accounts. And we have that link there for you. And I think we can stop the recording at this point.